Welcome to Emuna Beams with your host Laser Brody. We're out in the beautiful citrus orchard east of my hometown of Ashdod. It's a very intense citrus area, and we're a particular tangerine grove. And just right now, just finished tangerine picking the tangerines from the previous season, and the brand new tangerines are coming right now. You can see these tiny little baby tangerines growing on the tree, and these will be ready in another 3 months, by about the Rosh Hashanah time, and that's when we do make it Shechianu, make it new tangerines. And if you live in New York, or if you live in Miami, or if you live in Singapore, or Hong Kong, or Melbourne, or Toronto, wherever you may be, outside the land of Israel, and someone asks you, do you eat kosher fruit? You say, what do you mean kosher fruit? I buy kosher milk and drink kosher meat. I have kosher food, OU food. But what do you mean kosher fruit? Fruit doesn't have to be kosher. Well, if you live in the land of Israel, it certainly must be kosher, because there are many mitzvot of Torah that deal with the kashrut of fruit. And we'll soon see why we have mitzvot in the land of Israel that regulate the kashrut of fruit. We have the mitzvah of tumot, giving the first 2% to the Kohen, and the mitzvah of Maser Rishon, and the Maser Rishon that goes to the Levi, 10%, then Maser Sheni. It's a forced savings plan for when we go to Jerusalem 3 times a year at the time of the Beit HaMikdash, and this is the first, second, and the 4th and 5th years in the 7-year cycle. During the 3rd year and the 6th year, we give that second tithe to a poor people. It's called Maser Ani. And then right next to the 6th section, there's a section of new planting. No, we can't eat from new planting. It's the fruit of new planting for 3 years. And then the 4th year, we have to bring the fruit. It's called Hilulim. We have to bring the fruit to Jerusalem. Well, there's all types of mitzvot. People say, what are you confused? I've never heard of these mitzvot. Because you don't live by it. But here in the land of Israel, we live by these mitzvot. We live by our fruit and our vegetables, and we have to live according to the laws of Torah with our fruit and vegetables, just like we do with milk or meat or bread or anything. You wouldn't eat bread that didn't have challah taken off of it. In Eretz Yisrael, we're very concerned about mitzvah chadash and the wheat, not eating the new wheat. Outside of Israel, nobody thinks about that. Outside of Israel, they don't ask if there's oil in the fruit, if it's been the first 3 years. Why so many mitzvot in the land of Israel? The Arizal explains. The Arizal says the fruit of Eretz Yisrael, it has an extra holiness. Just like the land of Israel is called the Holy Land, it has an extra holiness. When something grows from the land of Israel, it grows with the holiness, and you just can't, you don't treat a prayer book like you treat a novel or a fiction book. It's got an extra holiness. By the same token, the fruit of the land of Israel has an extra holiness to it. But what does it do? Here's the thing. The Arizal in Kabbalah, he tells us that there are 2 aspects to everything we eat, everything we ingest, everything we take in. People look at food just from a physical dietary standpoint. Proteins, minerals, carbohydrates, fats, vitamins. Now, food has 2 aspects. There is a physical aspect of food, and the physical aspect of food is what does good for the body. That's your proteins, and your physical aspect, your carbohydrates, your minerals, and this acts on the physical side of the human being, which is the body. But we have a spiritual side, which is the soul. Just as every body, every person has a soul, every fruit has a soul. One thing, we make a blessing in the land of Israel every time the fruit trees blossom for the first time in the month of Nisan. Why? According to Kabbalah, we learned that there are souls trapped up in those fruit, and as we make a blessing on the blossom, the new fruit, we elevate them. As we make blessings on the fruit, we also elevate the souls that are trapped up in here. So when we eat the fruit properly, according to the mitzvot and according to the commandments, then this gives us nutrition, proper nutrition for the soul. And I can understand why many people outside the land of Israel, and they say, I hear this all the time. Hey, Lazy, what are you talking about? This nonsense, this Emuna stuff, and this, and believing in God, and hashgacha pratis, and divine providence, and God is with you, and this and that. Why? Because they don't have they could be spiritually suffering from spiritual malnutrition because the food they eat doesn't have spiritual sustenance. It's a spiritual junk food. Yeah, maybe it could be healthy food, but it's spiritual junk food. That's why I suggest if you're not in the land of Israel, buy fruit of the land of Israel, buy wine of the land of Israel, buy grape juice of the land of Israel, use the land of Israel products, not plug and play the land of Israel, but it's got a special holiness to it, and you feel this in your soul. Where else do we learn this? If we open our Gemara to Tractate Ketubot, page 111, page 12, Tractate Ketubot tells that the land of Israel is the land of Emuna, and someone lives outside the land of Israel as if he doesn't have a God, and someone lives in the land of Israel as if he does have a God. Why? Not that the person outside of Israel necessarily doesn't have a God, and not that the person in Israel necessarily does have a God, but when you live a spiritual life in the land of Israel, Hashem is for sure with you, and you could see that it's a special divine providence in the land of Israel, Hashgacha Pratis, that you don't find anywhere else. And it's conducive to learning an Emuna. Yes, life is difficult here, but it's conducive to learning Emuna. And now we think with COVID-19 and people losing their jobs and things closed down, beloved brothers, sisters, make plans. Start making plans. Throw your packs across the ocean. Come to the land of Israel. The land of Israel is waiting for you. And maybe all this has been happening in order to bring the Jewish people. Hashem wants to end gathering exiles because Hashem wants to bring us Mashiach now. He wants Mashiach now. And people, but Hashem made a promise. He said nobody will be left behind. So he's got to bring his beloved children from LA, and he's got to bring his beloved children from New York, and from Chicago, and from Melbourne, and from Sydney, and from Hong Kong, and from Singapore, and from UK. And it doesn't matter whether they speak in a Lancaster accent or a Cockney accent, they have to come. So I'm waiting. And when you come to the land of Israel, and you eat the food of land of Israel, eat the fruit of land of Israel, eat the wheat of land of Israel, you can see what we're talking about. When you pray to Hashem from the land of Israel, it's a complete different dimension. Life here, when you learn Torah in the land of Israel, it's a complete different dimension. It's not my words, it's the words of the Gemara. The Gemara says, Ein Torah keTorat Eretz Yisrael. There is no Torah like the Torah in the land of Israel. So a person could be in Williamsburg and in Borough Park and think he's doing great, think he's doing all. You have to understand, being outside the land of Israel, a person is influenced by the diaspora, has a heavy influence on the diaspora. And just people, very, very religious people and very Torah-learned people, they believe that their income comes from their work. That if they work, they'll have money. If they don't work, they won't have money. It doesn't work like that in the land of Israel. You know, you feel Hashem's divine providence right there with you. Okay, so this is to understand the holiness of the land of Israel that we see tangible in the fruit of the land of Israel. And just the fruit of the land of Israel, Hashem wants you to have fruit of the land of Israel, not only to eat it, but that your offspring should grow up in the land of Israel. You should have your fruit of the womb in the land of Israel. So we welcome you. Start make plans to coming, and Hashem should bless you. And even if you can't come for some reason, you have joint custody in your kids, you have an old parent, you can't come, Hashem's not going to say, why didn't you come? Because Hashem gave you the extenuating circumstance that didn't allow you to come. But Hashem is going to say, why didn't you not want to come? Why didn't you pray to come? Why didn't you ask me? You never prayed for it. You never asked me. So this is one thing. And don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of the difficulties. The Gemara tells us there are three things that come with difficulty. That is the world to come, Torah, and the land of Israel. And if you want all three, the best place to get them is right here in the land of Israel. We're waiting for you with open arms, beloved brothers and sisters. Take care, and God bless. This is Laser from Emuna Beams.